Okay, so continuing Jason Aaron's run on The Incredible Hulk and picking up with Stay Angry, this is kind of cool, but it's also a little bit weird. Like, it's kind of a weird story. It's kind of like this Incredible Hulk world tour in the sense that we get to see him face off or team up with different people, some of which we know and some of which we've never heard of and will never see again. But at the very least, it does make for something a little bit interesting in the sense that it actually gives us this idea of the whole Bruce Banner and Incredible Hulk dichotomy. Now, here's the downside to this. Jason Aaron is, I may kind of be fanboying out here a little bit, but to me, Jason Aaron is kind of like a master of character development. Like, if I give Jason Aaron a character, if Marvel gives him a character, or even if DC gives him a character, and they said, here, flesh this out, he'll do an amazing job. Whether you love Jane Foster or you hate Jane Foster Thor is irrelevant. The fact remains, he's done an amazing job bolstering her character and giving her more character depth than she ever had before. Some people hate the character depth she has, but she has more character depth now than she ever did before. Jason Aaron is really, really good about that kind of thing. With this whole situation with the Incredible Hulk, we don't really get that. In fact, what we're really kind of told here is that Bruce Banner and the Incredible Hulk are back together again. Their minds basically merged in the aftermath of the last explosion, and that's it. That's all we get. We don't get any huge, grandiose explanation. It's just they're back together again. Now, I would surmise that this was 2012. So we're coming up on the point where Marvel's basically planning out the events of Secret Wars and, Avengers and New Avengers and Avengers versus X-Men and Original Sin and Age of Ultron and so on and so forth. All these stories are being launched and are bringing in the idea of event fatigue and are all going towards the notion of all new, all different Marvel. And so it was basically at a point now where it was like time to wrap things up. With the Incredible Hulk, it kind of makes sense though, because remember, the Incredible Hulk was always a tough character to sell. He was always a tough guy to write. It's like writing Superman. Superman can be really, really tough to write if you do not focus on his interpersonal life, if you don't focus on Lois Lane, if you don't focus on, his son, Jonathan Kent. He can be a tough nut to crack in terms of creating good stories. The Incredible Hulk's much the same way, because what kind of a story do you write with a guy who has no limit to how strong he can get and will always be strong enough to face whatever force he's going against at any particular point in time? Well, you take the road that Jason Aaron did. What ends up happening here is we pick up with the Incredible Hulk, again, just kind of realizing that he and Bruce Banner have kind of merged, speculating on his own in terms of how it happened, and then ultimately goes against a group called the Mad Dogs, really just kind of this gang that's based out in Mexico, based out of Juarez, but it brings him into direct confrontation with the Punisher. Now, the reason why this matters is because of the fact that it's the Punisher. Where there's crime, the Punisher will go, and the Punisher's actions are worldwide. More often than not, you'll find him in the United States. He usually sticks there. That's really kind of his base of operations. But we've seen him travel across the world before. When he was with Anti-Venom, he traveled, outside the United States. Now, it was necessary to save a young girl, but the fact remains that he'll leave the US if that's what it requires. But with the idea of the Punisher being here, he's just been tracking down the Mad Dogs himself. So it's really just by sheer coincidence, the two of them happen to run into each other. But what ends up happening here is these Mad Dog guys are basically, peddling drugs and different things like that. But the other half of this is that traditionally speaking, the Incredible Hulk persona was always like the background persona, and Bruce Banner was always the dominant persona. What this does is it turns it on its head, and it says the Incredible Hulk is the dominant persona, and Bruce Banner is the recessive persona, simply meaning that the Incredible Hulk will turn back into Bruce Banner if he gets too calm. Now, the reason why this is cool is because it gives us the other side of the coin, right? Like, whenever the Incredible Hulk turns back into Bruce Banner, we don't really see what goes on with the Hulk in the mind of Bruce Banner. We assume it's around there somewhere, just waiting for its chance to come back out. We know the Incredible Hulk doesn't like Bruce Banner. He considers him to be weak, but we don't really see the other side of that. It's like seeing the other side of the mirror for the very first time. That's what this does. It basically says, look, from the aspect of the Incredible Hulk, it's the reverse of what we're used to. Bruce Banner becomes the Incredible Hulk whenever he gets too angry. The Incredible Hulk becomes Bruce Banner whenever he gets too calm. And while it is really simple and it is pretty basic, it's also really cool. It's really kind of interesting to get that little bit of an explanation there, that little tidbit. Now, from here, things are pretty straightforward. They're not by anything, by any means, a massive scenario or situation at all, not by any standard of measurement. But what ends up happening here is, of course, the Punisher and Incredible Hulk take down these Mad Dog guys, and that's really it. But then we end up finding out that they were basically transporting essentially just like a finger, just this substance, inside this finger. It was booby-trapped by Bruce Banner. The Incredible Hulk goes to pick it up and gets knocked out. When he wakes up, he's in Atlantis. Now, this is kind of the cool thing, is because this is basically just like a giant puzzle with the Incredible Hulk unwittingly gathering all the different pieces. And that's kind of the cool thing here. He runs into this Atlantean woman who basically says, hey, look, we're way beyond the realm of Namor the Submariner. We exist further down than he does in terms of the geographical location. It's really one of like the oldest cities in Atlantis. And that's usually how it works, to be honest. Whenever it is that Marvel wants to introduce something that has to do with Atlantis, and they want to basically chalk it up to something Namor didn't know about, or Namor doesn't have control over, then it's like basically saying, well, it's just a part of Atlantis that's really old, and it doesn't exist exist under the jurisdiction of Namor because we don't consider ourselves to be part of the actual Atlantean kingdom. It would be like if Texas seceded from the Union. That's basically what happened with, with the whole Atlantean kingdom. There are just different areas, different aspects that exist outside of the control of the main Atlantean kingdom. Now from here, we're basically given like this sort of enemy force, that the Incredible Hulk has to go against alongside this Atlantean girl. And the reason why is because the Incredible Hulk basically has an object embedded inside of his chest, kind of a rock of sorts. And the idea is that these people who are chasing after them are trying to get it back. Now, of course, this girl and the Incredible Hulk are able to overcome these guys and, eventually make their way up to the surface. And that's really about it. I mean, there's really not much more to it than that. This isn't really one of those stories, or at least one of those little sections of the story where there's a whole lot of time for dialogue. Instead, it's really mostly just action, just stuff happening. Things aren't that particularly interesting though, except for the fact that once they make it to the surface, we end up finding out that this girl is working alongside Bruce Banner, and that the Incredible Hulk is essentially subdued by this girl who can basically use her sonic voice to knock out the Incredible Hulk, and then presumably this rock is removed from his chest. Now, the reason why this matters is because of the fact that the Incredible Hulk is coming to the realization that Bruce Banner has been laying these plans. When Bruce Banner takes over, when the Incredible Hulk gets too calm and Bruce Banner takes over, Bruce Banner has been going to different people and outlining these different plans, different steps that are going to be taken, and he's basically using the Incredible Hulk to achieve each and every one of these steps. Now, the reason why this is so cool is because this highlights the idea of how well Bruce Banner knows the Incredible Hulk. The Incredible Hulk hates Banner. The Incredible Hulk despises Banner. He'd rather be rid of Banner. That was the whole basis behind the two of them being split apart in the first place. But the idea here is, despite the fact that they despise one another, they know each other better than almost anybody else could possibly know themselves, because they've just been part of each other for so long. And so again, this is really just kind of Bruce Banner using the nature of the Hulk to achieve these individual goals. For example, when the Incredible Hulk is knocked out by this Atlantean girl, he wakes up in space. Now, this is where things also get kind of cool, because, the Marvel cosmology and kind of like the in-universe history of Marvel holds a special place in my heart, as a comic book fan. It's just that way. I mean, I love the Marvel cosmic stuff. I love the in-universe history in terms of all the secret things that pop up that nobody ever really knew about before. And what ends up happening is, with the Incredible Hulk cropping up here, he basically runs into some young kid, only for us to find out that he's actually on a space station outside the Earth. Now, of course, there's also bears with freaking laser beams attached to their heads and so on and so forth. But essentially, almost all life, all the adults on this space station are essentially dead, with the exception of a handful. And so what happens is, after sitting down with all these different kids, one of the guys, or at least the last remaining leader, the last remaining adult, basically begins to sort of rehash this story. And this is actually really cool. What we end up finding out here is that this space station was built by the Russians during the Cold War. Of course, the Cold War basically being this idea of Russia and the United States, or I guess at the time, the USSR and the United States, basically expanding their own nuclear arsenal, trying to build as many spacecrafts as they could in order to get into space, to be the first one to dominate the spaceways, that kind of a thing. But what it also does is it brings in things like the Kree, it brings in things like the Skrulls. It basically tells us that somewhere along the line, Soviet scientists came across this alien technology and used it to build this space station that was hidden in secret. Now, of course, using the technology that was available, they basically made it cloaked. But this also brings in a couple questions, and we'll get to those here in a second. But what they ended up doing is they basically stockpiled the space station with a handful of different things. The first were, of course, resources. The second was by cranking out their own super soldiers. Now, this brings in the history of the Russians in terms of Marvel Comics. Remember, with the rise of mutants and with the formation of the Avengers, Russia countered with their own superhero team, the Winter Guard. But we also ended up having them going around and capturing people with superhuman powers. It's the reason why Professor X had saved, or had rescued, Colossus from Russia, because Colossus was going to be taken and inducted into Russia's super soldier program and become one of their elite members, which would have benefited them because of his organic steel skin that basically makes him almost completely indestructible. And so because of that, what the Soviets had also done is they had gone to the Red Room. Again, the Red Room basically being the Black Ops organization that was responsible for training assassins, Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow, being the most notable. They had gone to the Red Room and they had grabbed, different instructors or scientists or what have you, and they had brought them onto the space station as well. Now, for the most part, everything went fine. But again, this begs the question of groups like SWORD. If this ship was basically retrofitted with technology that was 30 or 40 years old at the time that it was used, and it was designed to make the ship invisible, then surely over the course of that 30 or 40 years, S.H.I.E.L.D. would have developed technology that would allow them to see cloaked vessels from enemy ships, so on and so forth, which means that when SWORD was formed, the Sentient World Observation and Response Department, they would have existed for the purpose of monitoring extraterrestrial threats and being able to detect cloaked ships. So it really begged the question, why didn't anybody know this space station was here? It's just one of those things where not every writer can know everything that's ever happened in comic books and keep track of all the continuity because Marvel's landscape is so expansive and half the writers don't even talk to each other anyway. So because of that, we ultimately end up finding out that when the Soviet Empire fell and gave way to what passes for a democratic regime, we ended up having this scenario where everybody who was on this space station was effectively forgotten. They were a secret group that nobody except some of the highest ranking members of the Soviet intelligence agencies actually knew about. But with those members basically leaving, either being assassinated or being terminated, dying of old age, retiring from their positions, whatever the case may be, this space station, in conjunction with all the stuff that they had done, had more or less just kind of been left and forgotten. And so ultimately the people up there went one of two ways. Either they went insane or they simply just started going crazy, simply started murdering people. Now, this led to basically, scientists trying to bail out, being killed by super soldiers in the process. And one of these is really like the last remaining super soldier, kind of like this guy that just hangs out and waits for a mission that will never come, waits for an invasion that's never going to take place, because they're really, the purpose of the space station was built to just wait for a time when they got orders from the USSR to begin an invasion against like the United States, or to begin occupying the moon, or whatever the case may be. But again, because of the fact that this guy is, is really kind of making life hell for these kids on the space station, and so on and so forth, the Incredible Hulk basically kills him. They end up in some great big huge fight. A hole gets torn in the hull of the space station, and this guy gets sucked out along with the laser beam bears and spacecraft, or I guess the escape pod goes back to Earth, and then we never really find out what happens to those kids. That's really about all there is to it. But from here, we basically pick up with the Incredible Hulk landing back on Earth while he's aboard, one of these vessels, and then more or less kind of calms down or what have you. And then Bruce Banner takes back over again, only for the Incredible Hulk to wake up and realize that he's been captured by Kraven the Hunter. Now again, this is just one of those small little segments, but as part of this overarching piece, this larger bit of the picture. The plants that had begun to overrun on the space station, some of them were brought back to Earth by the Incredible Hulk, which in turn were taken by Bruce Banner. In this instance, Kraven the Hunter has just been running around hunting Yetis. Kraven the Hunter, of course, being probably the single greatest hunter in the entirety of the Marvel Universe. Once he tracks a prey, he almost never loses it. In this instance, the reason why he has the Incredible Hulk is because it's just this notion of Banner's going around and poking around kind of drew my attention, but it eventually leads to the two of them kind of stumbling across the Sasquatch city. And again, the Incredible Hulk's taken prisoner, and this is kind of a weird scenario because with the Sasquatch city, it basically brings back this notion of just these small little territories that exist around Marvel Comics that nobody ever really deals with, or that writers make up, just for the sake of a story or different things like that. For example, the Savage Land. The Savage Land is something that's never really brought up anymore. It was all the rage back in the 1980s and 1990s. I mean, it was everywhere, especially in the X-Men books. Like, you could not have a story arc in the X-Men where they weren't like, oh, the Savage Land, like, we got to go to the Savage Land, whatever. But I mean, it's still kind of a cool little thing. But the Savage Land is a place in Antarctica that basically is just where an older alien race that had visited Earth at some point along the line, at the behest of the Beyonders, began taking all these different things, dinosaurs, plant life, so on and so forth, and threw it in Antarctica in this sort of giant game preserve, and then set it up so that the Antarctic weather would never affect this section of the world. And that's why when you read Marvel Comics and you read stories about the Savage Land, you'll see all manner of critters over there. I mean, you'll see dinosaurs, you'll see plants that are effectively extinct, or at least we would expect them to be by the time that story took place, but you find it all in the Savage Land because it's all just one of these little places that exists that nobody ever really goes to anymore. The fact remains here, the Sasquatch City is another one of these places where, the Sasquatch or the Yetis or what have you, they actually exist. It's almost like this Planet of the Apes kind of scenario. But of course, with Kraven the Hunter tracking them down, hunting them, capturing them for his own ends, so on and so forth, this leads to the Incredible Hulk, basically kind of allying himself with these Sasquatches, but also, kind of having to go against them and so on. And then eventually, turncoating and going against Kraven the Hunter, and then just kind of being inducted into the Sasquatch City as one of their own, just because of the fact that he protected them, and kept them safe. So again, it's one of these cool kind of scenarios because ultimately, the Incredible Hulk basically makes his escape. And then we end up finding him, waking up again in this old SHIELD base. Now, again, the cool thing about this is that this is life from the perspective of the Incredible Hulk. And that's one of the reasons why this is really cool, is because the Incredible Hulk, when Bruce Banner takes over, it seems like all we really see are just blips in his mind. He doesn't really know what happens. Now, this is intentionally designed to be that way. I mean, it's really just kind of Jason Aaron taking the idea that when the two of them remerged, when Bruce Banner came out, the Incredible Hulk would have no idea what happened. And that's something that's been toyed with over the years in Marvel Comics. There's been stories where the Incredible Hulk remembers everything Bruce Banner's done. He basically sees the world through the eyes of Bruce Banner, but he can't actually emerge unless Bruce Banner gets angry and loses control, because Bruce Banner, being in control of himself, basically keeps the Incredible Hulk confined into the recesses of his own mind. But there are other stories like this, where when the Incredible Hulk stops being the dominant personality and Bruce Banner takes over, that there's nothing there. It's just giant chunks of his life that are gone, and he has no idea what happens. Hence the reason why you see a lot of older stories with the Incredible Hulk. Bruce Banner becomes the Hulk, and the Hulk just flies off the handle and starts attacking things, because from the Hulk's perspective, as soon as he's there, all he sees is that people are just attacking him, and he doesn't know why. And so that's one of the reasons why the Incredible Hulk always kind of fought and so on and so forth. And so it's really kind of a coming to terms for the Incredible Hulk mythos with regards to Jason Aaron, because it's kind of returning the world's perspective through the eyes of the Incredible Hulk back to its roots and saying, hey, look, this is how the Incredible Hulk essentially functions. Now, of course, the arrival of the Incredible Hulk in this old S.H.I.E.L.D. prison basically triggered an alarm in the Oval Office, an alarm that has not been triggered for some, almost 100 years, to be honest, for the terms of multiple presidents. And so if you're a president sitting in your office and suddenly an alarm goes off that nobody ever told you about and that you don't know anything about, well, then suddenly bells start ringing and people start getting sent out and so on and so forth. And so, of course, through investigating, what happened or what was going on in this prison, we end up finding out that S.H.I.E.L.D. had become aware that the Incredible Hulk, that Bruce Banner, was identified as being the person down in there. Now, if they had sent their normal gamut of forces, let's say, for example, like the Mad Squad was still available, they may have been able to take the Incredible Hulk out, who knows? But they probably would have been defeated. And so what they do is they call in Ben Grimm and Wolverine. Really, this is kind of Jason Aaron, again, hitting back at home with the idea of the traditional Hulk mythos, because the Thing and Wolverine are probably two of the Incredible Hulk's most popular enemies. Right now, that may change a little bit because, there's the Incredible Hulk versus Thor, and then people just like the Incredible Hulk versus, like, these weird and kooky characters that are, like, stupid popular, like the Incredible Hulk versus Franklin Richards, or like the Incredible Hulk versus Galactus, something crazy and off the wall that the Incredible Hulk would obviously lose. Nonetheless, with the Incredible Hulk basically, in this prison cell and realizing that Banner only ever comes out when the Incredible Hulk stays extremely calm, but also realizing that Banner is up to his own motivations and his own, goings on and so on and so forth, the Incredible Hulk straddles this line where he's basically calm. He's not so calm that Bruce Banner will emerge. He's just angry enough that the Incredible Hulk stays in control, but he's also just not doing anything. He's like, look, if Banner has his own motivations and he's got his own plans, then if I do nothing, those plans can't come to fruition, so I'll literally just sit in one space. Of course, Banner, having accounted for this, basically activates, or at least had previously activated, this sort of failsafe device where the Incredible Hulk is basically injected with what amounts to like adrenaline, so to speak, where it literally sends his rage into overdrive. And I mean, he just starts crushing everything around him. Well, of course, this immediately leads to Ben Grimm and Wolverine attacking him. And again, that's why this is so cool, is because much like the Incredible Hulk, the example we gave where the Incredible Hulk manifests, Bruce Banner was running away from enemies or something like that, the Incredible Hulk manifests, he doesn't remember anything Bruce Banner was doing, so all he sees are enemies around him. It's the same thing with Ben Grimm and Wolverine. I mean, as soon as they get inside the facility, the first thing they hear is the Incredible Hulk just going aggro and attacking everything that he sees. And so again, it's really kind of cool here because, it's just this great moment where the two of them really try to take the Incredible Hulk on as best they can. Now again, over the years, the Incredible Hulk's abilities, his strengths and so on and so forth have waxed and waned. They've changed, they've increased, they've decreased. We've seen the Incredible Hulk, able to do everything from, stomp on the eastern seaboard and shake the entirety of the east coast of the United States, all the way down to being stronger than your average bear, being stronger, a little bit stronger than the Thing, but nowhere near as strong as we would expect him to be. Now, when we're talking about like the weakest point of the Incredible Hulk, the Incredible Hulk at his absolute weakest is still stronger than like a vast majority of everybody in Marvel Comics. So I mean, take it for a grain of salt when I'm talking about the Incredible Hulk at his weakest point. I mean, it's still a level of strength that almost nobody can withstand. But the fact remains here that it's waxed and waned and it's changed over the years. Now, of course, we end up having the Incredible Hulk just taking out Wolverine and Ben Grimm. It's really not much of a conflict. Now, the other half of this is, keep in mind, this is not a normal Incredible Hulk facing off against them. This is the Incredible Hulk injected with what amounts to like liquid rage and just losing his mind. So it's not like Worldbreaker Hulk, but this is about as close as we get to like Savage Hulk as we traditionally think of him. And so again, it's really kind of cool because I wouldn't go as far as to say that Ben Grimm and Wolverine are fighting for their lives, but they're pretty close to it. I mean, at any point they could just run off and that would really be it. They would be like, okay, time to retreat. They could just leave. But as long as they keep fighting, the Incredible Hulk keeps dishing these blows to him. Now, the other half of this is, remember, we're talking about a couple of guys who have virtually limitless stamina. I mean, Wolverine can just keep fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. He can't fight as long as the Incredible Hulk or as long as the Thing, but he can fight for a pretty long time. After a while, it would just kind of fall onto the Thing to be able to withstand against the Incredible Hulk. And then after a certain amount of time, the Incredible Hulk would just win because because his strength would just keep increasing the angrier he got. But, you know, in the interim, he's able to basically overpower the both of them and then just sort of stumble off as Bruce Banner. And that's really about it. And so what ends up happening is that with the Incredible Hulk transformed back into Bruce Banner, Ben Grimm and Wolverine just kind of leave. They just sort of walk away and call it a day. And that's really the end of that. And so what ends up happening is with Bruce Banner having reemerged, we don't find out what happens immediately after that. Instead, we pick up at some point in time later on with the Incredible Hulk strapped to a chair. And Bruce Banner basically saying, look, for years, we've been trying to get rid of each other and you successfully cut me out. We remerged, but I found a cure for the Hulk. I found a way to basically eliminate you. I found a way to get rid of you. And that's the whole thing here, is because the Incredible Hulk was gathering up the ingredients for this cure and didn't even know that he was doing it. As far as he knew, he was just encountering the Atlanteans in some space station and, you know, the city of the Sasquatch people and, you know, this old shield base and so on and so forth. But whether it was through these injections or exposure to some kind of a gas or the rock in his chest, he was gathering all these ingredients together and didn't realize it. And so in these final moments, or at least in the moments prior to this, when he had escaped the shield bunker after fighting Wolverine and Ben Grimm, transformed back into Bruce Banner used that time to grab the ingredients to get them all together to engineer a cure, strap himself into a chair after recording a video, and this is the result of what we're seeing. He's basically saying, look, you exposed me to a gamma bomb and let me die. Luckily, my conscious mind remerged with yours and we were back into the same body again, but I have a cure for you. I have a way to kill you. And either you're going to stay the Incredible Hulk forever, or at some point you're going to turn back into Bruce Banner. And when you do, I will take that opportunity to kill you. So here is exactly what's going to happen next, which we do not find out in this video. If you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you guys later. Peace.